much for coming out. I know it's a busy time of the year. We could send word all over campus, flyers and stuff, but you know what you're going to get. But it is going to be recorded and posted in various places, including the Ellsberg Initiative website, so the event can be spread electronically. All right. So I'm Chris Oppie. I'm professor of history here at UMass and director of the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 4th annual Ellsberg Lecture by acclaimed journalist, writer, and radio host Farai Chideya, whose talk, as you can see, is called How to Read the United States on the eve of 250th birthday of the United States. I want to thank her and also thank program manager for the Ellsberg Initiative, Graham Tierney, and I don't know if our intern Melissa's here, but she's done a lot of work, helpful work. The event, as I say, is hosted by the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy, so forgive me for saying just a few words about that. It was inspired by the 2019 acquisition by UMass of the Daniel Ellsberg papers, this extraordinary treasure trove of more than 600 boxes of materials. Just a reminder, he was the guy who, in 1971, former insider and supporter of the Vietnam War, who turned so radically against it that he leaked to the press and the public a 7,000-page classified history of decision-making about Vietnam that was published, most people don't know this, published in 19 different newspapers, not just the Times and the Post, in great defiance of the Nixon administration, which had issued for the first time in U.S. history prior restraint, kind of stop the press's order to the press. So it was a great moment in American journalism, kind of mass defiance. So our mission with this initiative, hopefully someday an actual permanent institute, is to promote public awareness, scholarship, and activism on some of the key overlapping issues that shape Ellsberg's legacy. That would be the desire for a democratic and anti-imperial foreign policy, greater government transparency and accountability, guardrails on the First Amendment and other rights, nuclear disarmament, and environmental as well as social justice. Dan died in June of 2023 at the age of 92, and I can't imagine how horrified he would be if he were still alive about the events of the past 2 years. But I am certain that he would encourage us to draw some hope and inspiration from prior movements for peace, democracy, and justice. His own 50-plus years of activism were largely inspired by the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement of the 60s and 70s. He was particularly moved by more than 3,200 young Americans who went to prison in resistance to the Vietnam War and the draft to which they refused to submit. So he would encourage our own relentless, courageous, nonviolent activism, and as he often said, courage is contagious. We will have time for questions at the end, so as you're listening, be thinking of it, and we'll open the floor as soon as Farai's done. So I have the honor now of introducing her. Farai Chideya is an independent journalist who created Our Body Politic, a nationally syndicated radio show and podcast that focuses largely on Black women and all women of color. One of their most memorable podcasts was a 6-part series called January 6th, An American Story. It chronicles the experiences of people of color who served as investigators on the January 6th committee. It's quite extraordinary. And builds as part of a much larger body of work that she's done on white Christian nationalism and violent domestic terrorism, or extremism, bash terrorism. She has also covered mainstream politics, every presidential election since 1996. Has worked for 538, NPR, CNN, ABC, and NPR, and numerous other networks. She's written 6 books, the most recent of which is called The Episodic Career, How to Thrive at Work in the Age of Disruption. She was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, graduated from Harvard University, and lives in both Brooklyn, New York, and Washington, D.C. So, thank you for all.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you to the Ellsberg Initiative. Thank you, Brennan. I will raise my hand. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, also, back there was Farai.com/Ellsberg. It is live, but it is not fully populated, so check back on Monday or something. I am putting the citations and links so you can actually go to the horse's mouth and see what's there. And if you fall down the accelerationist rabbit hole the way I did, let me know what you find. But yeah, I'm Farai. Chris introduced me, and I think that this is from something I wrote for CNN after I predicted January 6th, and I also went to cover it. When journalism and civic discourse treat extremists as an other, large swaths of society fail to comprehend their ubiquity or their connections to fundamental issues and institutions. America has been so eager to describe itself as post-racial that we papered over the growing antipathy to a multiracial democracy, saying it wasn't the America we knew. Such attempts to explain away racial animus emboldened extremists and led us to where we are today. And I do fundamentally believe, if you had a top 10 of institutions that failed America, journalism would be on it. It's just a question of where on that list. And so this is the doc I did with some amazing people. And someone asked me, someone who worked on the project said, why would you do just the people of color? It was a much bigger team. I said, because they have a mix of lived experience of race and legal expertise in race, the law, extremism. So top left is Candace Phoenix. She is one of my heroes. 1 week she ran both the second impeachment trial and the January 6th committee, like administratively. She was like, she's, Representative Jamie Raskin says she should be on the Supreme Court. I agree. And then bottom left is Robin Peguero. He's an Afro-Latino Floridian who is running for Congress this cycle. So they're very interesting people, and I urge you to listen to this. And so this is just a little bit of, these are links to stories I did for 538 during the 2016 election. I did a project called The Voters where I traveled all around the country, spoke to people of different races, different faiths, hitting the mosques, hitting the evangelical churches, hitting the Black churches, and I got really intimate with people. And I was able to get some pretty extraordinary stories. Now, first of all, because of this reporting, I thought Trump was likely to win. I didn't say definitely would win, but something that most people don't talk about is that the Trump campaign won on independent messaging. So if you were working for the Trump campaign in the Rust Belt, you talked about Rust Belt issues. If you were in evangelical, you talked about evangelicals. Clinton had a totally top-down structure where they were forbidden to rewrite their canvassing materials. And in Ohio, where they knew they were probably going to lose, a group of Black staffers and volunteers rewrote the materials anyway. They were like, we are going to lose if we give everyone the same message. So I think Trump won in large part because of the free media he got. He got more free media during the primary than all of the other Republicans combined. And Les Moonves, the now disgraced former head of CBS News, kept saying that Trump wasn't good for America, but it was good for CBS. And this was on earnings calls, and somebody on there obviously recorded it. So, yeah, thanks. But, I have pretty good spotty sense. I call this era the democrapocalypse. It's like, yeah. And you can also just see how it works. Oh crap! Apocalypse. And so I predicted this. 5 years ago, I wrote a private letter to a networking group, including several billionaires, some of whom you would know, because I was like, you're the power players here. And I was like, and these are some of the things I said. In essence, I've seen some form of this era of rage, socioeconomic collapse, and reckoning coming for 2 years. A lot of that is pattern recognition honed over 30 years of journalism. American capitalism is a particular mix of capitalism, kleptocracy, and oligarchy, and becoming more of the latter two over time. I think my predictions were pretty good. I was basically like, you know, red alert, red alert. And they were like, nah, boo. And I get it, you know, it's like, how are you going to know that I am a person with the knowledge? They've known me for a long time, but you know, I'm neurodivergent in more than one way, and I think that that combined with my lived experience and my field experience is why I'm new. So I've been to 49 of the 50 US states. I understand what people are like. I know how to talk to them. My tip for anyone doing field reporting, don't start with the interview. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, or not coffee. Ask them about their pets, their church, their mosque, their synagogue, their lawn, whatever, and keep talking to them about them until they're like, aren't you gonna interview me? And that's when you go in, because you've already built the trust of knowing, and I'm genuinely interested in the things I'm asking about. I don't ask about lawns, but I ask about family history and stuff, and I really enjoy it. If you are someone who truly cares about people and is willing to deal with a little rejection, you can get amazing stories. So yeah, this is where we are. So I predicted the democrapocalypse, and we have to learn something. This era is not just about liberal versus conservative or left versus right. It's about pluralist versus anti-pluralist. So this is my uncle. We called him Uncle Renzi, which was a family nickname. Colonel Oliver Charles Stokes Jr. He was a genius, a literal genius. He has a Bronze Star from Vietnam. He was a communications engineer, kind of setting up telecommunications in the jungle. He went on to serve in Taiwan, Brussels, and various American places. One place that really stood out to him was Saudi Arabia. They valued him so much that they put him in 2 years of language school and then sent him to be an envoy to Saudi Arabia. So that's my uncle, and I want to say that he is, or was, a conservative, a Republican, and a pluralist. If he had not already passed, he would be passing out from what's happening to the military today. But you don't have to be a xenophobe to love America, and people are pretending that that's the case, and I resent that. So I won't go through all of these, but this is a comparison of what anti-pluralist looks like and pluralist looks like. Many different groups, you know, people with disabilities, LGBTQ, people of various races get demonized on one side and, you know, have access to power on the other side. It's not just, I think equality is overrated, and I'll tell you what I mean. An emphasis on equality denies the very real evidence that human psychology is about dominance and that people want to be in charge. But you can mitigate that quest for dominance by forming allegiances where different groups feel powerful in and of themselves, and they come together, and together they negotiate a future. I don't think it's just like, you know, God bless Reverend King, it's not about the content of character. It's about allegiances, and you can have functional allegiances or dysfunctional ones. One more thing I will point out is chauvinist, only men lead, from anti-pluralism. Guess who's a chauvinist? Enrique Tarrio. The Proud Boys call themselves Western chauvinists, meaning we are people from the West and only men should lead in the West. They're also white supremacists, but that's their, like, you know, so chauvinism is deeply baked into this. And so another thing I learned from traveling so much is that people don't live in America, they live in reality zones. I came to believe that humans lived in reality zones with quite different rules about identity, fairness, and achievement. Inside each of those zones was an internally consistent reality, but as one crossed barriers of geography, class, culture, religion, and race, the rules changed entirely. And I think one reason that I've been able to access some wisdom is that I've been willing to go into reality zones where people like me don't usually go, like meeting Klan members in a park and ride lot. I'm willing to tolerate talking to people who don't like me and show that they don't like me, but are willing to talk to me. Because I can't just go around being on a friendship tour and get the story of America. I have to talk to other people too. And I think that this reality zone thing, like, this is actually, it wasn't actually about how I traveled. I wrote this about my move from Manhattan to Baltimore. In Manhattan, and this was when I was 6 years old, Manhattan, free to be you and me, multiracial, right across from Central Park, super fun stuff, happening all the time. I go to Baltimore and you can feel the boot of Jim Crow. It's like, it's the 1970s, but Jim Crow was still very active in Baltimore. I was like, what the heck is going on? And also, race can be many things. And I went from seeing race as an attribute, like the color of shirt you wear, to race as destiny. Like race was this thing that you were expected to live. And so to see those set me off on this quest too. So democracy is meaningless without results. To me, results would be these things: social mobility, fair wages for work, meritocracy, healthcare, regulation which protects citizens while strengthening the business environment. I remember being at the same networking conference, and I had a failed adoption. I had 3 failed adoptions from a horrible agency because none of these women wanted to give up their kids. They were just poor, and they thought about giving up their kids, and then they changed their mind. And I have no beef with them. I have beef with the agency system and what it did. But, so I believe that the adoption agencies should be highly regulated, but not put out of business. I mean, like, at the networking conference, someone was like, "You're a communist." I was like, how does like wanting to feed pregnant women make me a communist? Like, come on, like let's get some analysis. But people come at me all the time, you know, just about wanting basic services for people. It's like, what happens when you go on vacation in Europe? There's services that totally outstrip the United States. So I get frustrated with that. And you can just cycle through these. These are pictures of my mom. This was her getting into the Peace Corps, and I left the broken glass onto it because it's kind of a broken dream. And her hot, sexy mama days. I think based on her face, she probably either had just given birth to me or was getting ready to give birth to me. This was her at the Obama inauguration. And you can leave this up. This is me, my mother, my sister, and my grandmother at my sister's medical school graduation. And the reason I put this here is because my family has endured real tragedies with the medical system. My grandmother died of metastatic cancer that her doctor ignored for 4 years, ignored her complaints, which is a classic thing that happens to Black women disproportionately. My mother is dying now of a heart condition that her doctors failed to diagnose for 10 years. 10 years. And I think the fact that they were both elderly Black women played a role, potentially, but also the organization that she got healthcare from makes billions of dollars a year in aggregate and has had many complaints from workers saying we are not meeting standards of care. That should not stand. I don't want anybody else's relatives dying because we failed to regulate and we failed to provide adequate health care. And where did our land go? When you talk about things with my family. So this is not my family, but families in the area where we originally come from, which is Westmoreland County, Virginia. Very, at the time, prosperous Black farming community, also good waterways. It's close to where George Washington was born, not Monticello, but where he was born. And I've been there, it's beautiful. And our family used to have quite a lot of land, but you know what happened before and during Jim Crow? They would arrest people on whatever charge, trumped up. And they'd be like, you can pay us this to get them out. We don't have this. Well, you could give us an acre of your land. And that was the racket they ran until my family has almost nothing. It's like this is important because foodways are one of the things I'm going to talk about that we need to strengthen, because I believe that during our great national discombobulation, some of the supply chains will break down. But what if the supply chain broke down and my family had all this land and there were no jobs in the AI job apocalypse? We could all just drive to Westmoreland County. Like, I grew up urban farming. I wasn't a farmer, but I grew food. I mean, I'm happy to put my hands in the soil, but we don't have that land anymore. Let's try this. It's not my fault, but it is my problem. This would solve so many issues. I didn't own slaves. My family just moved here in the 1950s. It's not my fault, but it is my problem because it creates a country with certain inequalities that could destroy us. My personal, it's not my fault, but it is my problem, is around indigenous people. I live in New York and DC. And this year, for the holidays, I'm going to make financial donations to the Piscataway in DC and the Lenape in New York. I think a lot of indigenous people are getting tired of the land acknowledgement, like, yes, you stole our land, but what are you going to do? So what I can do now is learn history and give money. Oh, Nick Fuentes. Jews are running society. Women need to shut them up. Blacks need to be in prison for the most part, and we would live in paradise. It's that simple. Now, if you are white, Nick is claiming you. You can either do the unpaid civic labor and call him out, or he will fold you into his wing. And I think this was a big thing that happened. People were like, he doesn't speak for me. Well, why don't you say he doesn't speak for you? Like, don't be a little quisling. Like, this could actually result in life or death, civil war stuff. All right, this needs to be corrected. The 3 at the bottom should be 2028. But looking to the next 5 years, there are strong possibilities of political violence this coming year, on July 4th, the 250th. And almost all of the extremist violence in the US is from the right, but this could also have stuff from the left. I'm curious to see. And then Election Day, 2028, Certification Day, of the vote, Inauguration Day, all of them, I will not be at my DC place. I might not even be in New York. I think that, I'll talk about it now. I think for the stuff in 2028, there will definitely be people mobilizing on both sides of the pluralist, anti-pluralist divide, and the extremist anti-pluralist divide. And what I mean by people who are pluralist mobilizing, I don't mean people doing no kings, because that's good. I mean, would there be military members and veterans who knew that there was going to be a coup and who would stand up for the governance of the country? I don't think that's out of the question. You could see military on military violence, law enforcement on law enforcement violence. Like I said, I'm not going to be in DC and I might be out of the country. So like the next 5 years, I think there'll be a general decline in public services and public safety, fear of participating in politics, but it's still possible to make what's called the U-turn if we work for it. And the U-turn is when a society goes from being a democracy to autocracy, but then quickly bounces back, and often bounces back better, because they're like, oh no, we've got to fix this stuff. So I don't see a lot of evidence that the U-turn is being, the fire is being stoked as much as we need, so we'll see. So these are some factors in whether or not this era goes into a hot civil war. And what I mean is, we're already in a cold civil war. People are using words, employment, access, all these tools to control the narrative. But the narrative is different from the bullet. And there are 8 to 15 billion rounds of ammunition in civilian hands. And they are being marketed, this is from The Trace, one of my favorite outlets. It covers nonprofit newsroom covering gun violence. And they did a whole series on how the boogaloo, or race war, was being embedded in marketing messages to sell guns and ammo. I will put all of this in my resource guide, but it's truly scary stuff. Because, I mean, like, divide 15 billion by the population of the United States and know that a lot of people don't have any ammo, it's a little grim. This is another wild card. The accelerationists are white supremacists who want to really have it all burned down and quickly. So they have been seeking nuclear materials to drop dirty bombs and terrorize populations and kill people. Like, dirty bombs don't kill a lot of people compared to some other forms of terrorism, but who wants to be radioactive, right? So dirty bombs are very effective at terror. They're not just doing that, they are also trying to take down the power grid. I think we're gonna see that more often. I'm a low-key prepper. I have a whole power system. I have water, I have dried food. And like I said, there's certain days I won't be in town, and so I think I just will be away based on my research and spidey sense. But one thing I thought about is, like, even if I'm away, could independent journalists I know use my place as a newsroom during something? So I want to prepare it for that. Like, if I get enough money, I'll even put some equipment into it. And I'm not trying to be sensationalistic here. Understand that these people are already operating, but whether or not they operate at scale and really go for it is up to us and up to our government. Mainly up to our government, which has pretty much stopped enforcing against white supremacists. And not only not enforcing, we have a really great interview on Our Body Politic that I will put on the Ellsberg page with the woman who wrote the book, How Civil Wars Start, Barbara F. Walter, and with Dr. Earl Suthers, who is a counterterrorism expert at UCLA. So Dr. Suthers had been in the FBI for a long time. He's a black man. And he had people, and he was LAPD, then FBI. He had people he was working with openly say that they were Klan members or whatever. Like, and there's an incredible journalist named Cerise Castle, an independent journalist, who did a whole award-winning series, and I think now a book, on deputy gangs. So deputy gangs are white supremacist gangs of deputies in the LA County Sheriff's Department. Like, I think that the people who are already embedded as extremists in the military and law enforcement are getting reinforcements. Like, you know, and one of the really interesting things someone said, you know, mildly off the record, but not top secret, is she, a retired officer, military officer, said, you know why we have white supremacists in the military? And I was like, why? She said, we need them. We can't get enough recruits to turn them down. Like, think about that. This is serious stuff. And so some really wild things could pop off towards the end of this administration or after. So these are the pivots that I see. Stability of the US military and law enforcement, we already talked a bit about that. There's also this idea, the US military was designed to be able to fight on two fronts at once. If there's a global war, which I don't see happening right now, but it could happen within the next 20 years, the US will be fighting on three fronts, including the South China Sea. We are not prepared for that. I would prefer not fight at all, but if there's going to be fighting, I would like the military to be organized around excellence and not around political cronyism. That's going to blow back real hard. So food access and food as weapon. There's a scenario that I call the Gretna scenario, and it's also about, we'll see more of it in climate catastrophes. So Gretna was a part of Louisiana that was across the bridge from New Orleans. and white Gretna residents held up guns and said, you will not cross into our area. You're gonna have the Gretnaization of food access. So suppose that there is a climate event, and people have no food because the supply chain isn't working fast enough. Somebody will get the shipment. Will they share it? You know, this stuff is real. So when you don't have the ability to really enforce local laws and protocols, I think you will see people withholding resources, particularly in climate disasters and related. And then food access, I think that we should really look at creating more public foodways. So creating micro farms all over the place that people can learn to grow food in, and they can reap, the harvest. We grew up urban farming, but also gleaning. We would glean fruit from a park near our house that used to actually have farms and orchards. So there were all these wonderful trees. There were chestnut trees, there were fruit trees. And when the season hit, we would go and get what we wanted. And there's more and more people also gleaning. But I think that we should be prepared for a mutual aid mindset around some of the things we take for granted now. Like DoorDash, not so much. Wealth inequality. I've spent a fair amount of time around billionaires. I don't envy them. I'm someone who wants freedom, and what I mean by that is I'm gonna go to Carnival in the West Indies and dance around with my friends, and there won't have to be any bodyguards or security guards, and I won't have to worry that someone's gonna kidnap me, because people have been kidnapped these days over crypto, mainly. Like, to be a billionaire is incredibly unsafe. The question is, what do you do with your billionaire status? Are you a McKinsey or are you a Bezos? You know, like two sides of the same coin. And having been around billionaires, you know, as we say, my broke ass, being around billionaires also gave me an idea for the novel I just finished. So many years ago, I was outside of the country, and I was at a business networking thing that included some outdoor stuff, and we're all riding bikes. And the guy throwing the conference was really he just looked a little sad and flat. The other people were great. And then there was one guy who was the life of the party. He was like doing bike tricks, he was whatever. And only belatedly did I realize that he was the bodyguard and the sad guy was the billionaire. And I just looked, the billionaire is now worth about $25 billion. Money can free you or it can chain you. And my novel is set 200 years from now. Genomics is the pivot technology, but there's other things. And it's told from the perspective of a young woman who is bodyguard to the richest family in the world. And her ability to observe privilege and also the restraints, the constraints. And then the scion of the family has a whole growth trajectory. So anyway, I would like a lot more money because I'm currently unemployed, but I don't want to be chained to money as something that defines me, you know? And hopefully people with the resources will start using them now, because some things you can't do later. Like, we're gonna have to build some mechanisms now. Like, so if there is, let's say, a climate crisis 10 years from now, a climate event 10 years from now, and they have these micro farms, they will materially be living differently than people who are just bereft and without. Like, there's no reason for a country this rich to not fortify ourselves for what is going to be a challenging time. I have this one scenario talking about contested land access. So I've been pushing the window further out bit by bit, but like 150 years from now, I could see some internal civil war with a trillionaire who owns a bazillion acres of land and the militias on the outside. Everybody else would be screwed, you know. Poor and working class people would be screwed, tribes would be screwed, but the largest privately held land holdings are in the West because of the way the US was settled. And I think that people in militias know the West a lot better than someone who moves in from out of town. You can only have things to the degree you're willing to defend them. And so anyone with wealth, if things pop off, is gonna have to ask, how many people are we willing to kill today to keep what we have? I don't want to have to ask that. Tech, AI, genomics, and more. I think genomics is much more consequential in the long run than AI. I covered the first ever conference on human gene editing, and they were like, oh, we're gonna have a moratorium on like using it on children, to birth children. Like 2 years later, someone does it. A Chinese scientist, he altered the genome of embryos of 2 girls. Genomics can be used for incredible good, and in a positive scenario, you could develop remediation strategies. So suppose that you have lakes that are having algae blooms and then the fish die, whatever. You could design an organism that loves the taste of that algae that nothing else likes. And you can drop that in the water, clean it up, but you have to make sure that that doesn't become a pervasive species so there's gonna be some trial and error, but I think there's room for genomics also in solving disease. But I think it will also be used as a trap. First of all, just financially, it'll like, you're not pretty enough, you're not handsome enough. It's like, you can get a slightly different nose if you do this viral payload, and then your gene says your nose should be this big and your cartilage starts growing, whatever. There's gonna be that. Good, if you want it, fine. But what if you bred people to be less intelligent and to be subservient? This comes up in different science fiction novels. Brave New World talks about a world where engineered low IQ produces the worker class. This is not impossible. It's totally possible. That terrifies me. Any trait that you have that can be altered, there's alterations that happen in embryos, and obviously they build the body out of the DNA that you have given them. But there's also the way to do alterations on existing people, sometimes to great effect. There was a way to block AIDS, to cure AIDS. And I haven't seen it go to mass market, but I talked to the scientists who did it. And basically what they did was there's a T cell receptor that, allows the infection to enter the body. They created organisms with no T cell, like AIDS has nothing to bond to. So it's fascinating, but I'm concerned that we will use it for really scary dominance games. And this is my honor roll. This is people who I think should be endowed. And what I mean by that is, we talk about an endowed chair of X, Y, or Z, whatever. Philanthropy and wealthy people need to just give big piles of money to the people who will solve our problems. When I worked on Our Body Politic, we were always going around trying to get another $5 for the bake sale, you know what I mean? And we did the work, but in the end, we couldn't keep up with the financial churn. Stop nickel and diming. Put some money on the table. So here's the honor roll. Dr. Sophia Noble of the UCLA Center on Resilience and Digital Justice, like Humans First, Tech Second. Julio Varela of Latino Newsletter, an award-winning publication, and more of a network. Dana Kester, 100 Days in Appalachia. They're a tiny newsroom that won a Murrow Award for reporting on extremism, and they right now are looking at data centers in Appalachia. Really great stuff. And she's also a leader of a network. Chris Goldsmith, total badass, of Task Force Butler, which is basically like Veterans Against Nazis. They infiltrate extremist groups and get the scoop. Pop Culture Collaborative, I'm a big fan. They do narrative change. They fund things like, comedians, podcasters, etc., who are pluralists. And, I think that if we are going to find our way together as a nation, that culture has to be a key part of it. Unsuk Lee, AAPI Civic Engagement Fund, incredible visionary and someone who can really mobilize Asian Americans. Peter Sanderford of Sky Garden STX. Now, she's someone who uses public art to heal wounds of race and culture. Like, she has this whole project where you go and get a ribbon and you can write a microaggression on it that happened to you, or a macroaggression, and that gets woven into a full tapestry. And then she scans it and digitally maps what kinds of aggressions are happening, and people find it really healing. She does public art. She was collected by the Guggenheim. I think that kind of healing culture is great. Crystal Echohawk of Indigenous House. She used to run something called Illuminatives, and she and her collaborators closed it down to create a kind of an agency and broadcast system for Indigenous creators. It's really quite amazing stuff, and that's a for-profit model. Dr. Fox Harrell, MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality, expert in how to use things like video games in pro-social ways and not in anti-social ways, and also looking at characterization of people in virtual spaces, what is racist, what is not. Like, he did this whole thing on video gaming that was fascinating, where he found that in one game, Black characters could not be optimized for either intelligence or strength. It's like, literally, like, to win, you would have to play as a white guy. And it's weird, but like, he's brilliant. Professor Iris Bonet and Siri Chalazi, the Women in Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. They just came out with a book, Make Work Fair, Data-Driven Design for Real Results. DEI is a scam. It was always a scam. It just wasn't the scam people said it was. It was a chance for businesses to feel good about themselves and put fried chicken on the table on Juneteenth or whatever. A friend of mine, Pamela Newkirk of NYU, wrote a book that's great, Diversity Inc., on all the BS. Like, just hire people fairly. And I didn't even mention it, but my grandmother, I don't think I mentioned it, was an employment discrimination whistleblower at Social Security. And she found that for the typing test that the secretaries got, potential secretaries got, they hired all of the white women before any of the Black women, regardless of test score. And she fought 7 years to get them to clean up their house. She really got hazed, and she lost money because they wouldn't give her promotions or raises, but it was one of the proudest things she did in her life. And, I just think that, I'm ready for the term DEI to disappear, but Bonet and Chalazi are incredible at using actual research to find out how to debias systems without causing some of the huge problems that can come out. Basically, if you have a workplace, this isn't even about debiasing who's hired, but if you have a workplace where someone is a harasser, don't give them a DEI, don't harass thing. That just makes them angrier. And don't have people below them talk to them. You have to have people above them. These are basic things. Like, they have much more sophisticated things, but these are the kinds of things that come up. And the last one is Professor Chris Hoppe at the Ellsberg Institute. And so why am I putting this here? I used to work as a grant maker at the Ford Foundation, and I'm gonna be like, hey, how you doing? Look at this list. Give some money. Will it work? I don't know. Can't hurt. This is one of my favorite humans. She's now 104 years old, and she was a park ranger. And this quote is really one that I live by. Democracy has been experiencing these periods of chaos since 1776. They come and go. And it's in those periods that democracy is redefined. She is a fundamental optimist. You know, her grandmother was enslaved as a child. And she talks about, you know, like, if people against, you know, some kind of functional society were not doing their work, I would still be a slave like my great-grandmother. And I think you don't have to have ancestors who were enslaved. You can just be like, what do I have in life now that's really good? You know, it could be going to this university. It could be being able to walk freely in the streets. There's a lot of parts of the world where you can't walk freely in the streets. Think about what you have and what you don't have. Fight for what you don't have. Enjoy what you do have. So this is one last thing from the letter to the elite networking group. None of us will live forever. Our nation might not either. And how long America lasts and how healthy it is depends on you. I don't have enough power and leverage to save America from our own worst instincts, but we do collectively. I wish us all good luck in co-creating a world we want to live in. So, it's up to us. Are you ready? Thank you.
Well, good. We have plenty of time for discussion and questions. I have some of my own, but I'd rather just begin by opening it up to the floor.
Hi.
Thank you for that. That was really interesting and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
So thank you. I was interested in your characterization of us being in a time of cold civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love you to say more about that. And in particular, I'd like to have you think about how we might successfully extract ourselves from this cold civil war.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I think the fact that I'm unemployed and so many senior Black women I know are unemployed, people who are TV producers, whatever, you know, like I wrote to someone, hey, I'm looking for a job, and he was like, you're the fourth Black woman today who at a senior level who said, so I think that Black women have been canceled. We have been canceled from the economy, and that's because Black women have overwhelmingly voted for the Democratic Party. And we also just, like my grandmother, we don't put up with no nonsense, you know? So I think that one thing people can do is think about what your relationship is. Like, this may not be fair, but I have a friend who's a white man, who's a business owner. I'm like, you should hire some Black women who are unemployed and overqualified. Like, just see, yeah, I'm sure somebody can do something for you. But unless you have a truly, and so that would stabilize. So aside from me being a Black woman and thinking about that, employing Black women tends to stabilize democracy because Black women fight for democracy. But I'm also worried that Black women are going to stop fighting for democracy because democracy is not fighting for them. But that is one thing. But I think that in this climate, you know, it's really more of an oxytocin, tend and befriend situation for mutual aid networks. Feel really strong in yourself. Like, know what you need and have it. So that when things go sideways, if they do, you're fine. There's nothing wrong, like, it's not like save the world has to be selfless. You know, you can be selfish, like, okay, how am I going to, like, I know evacuation routes out of New York City and where I go. I know evacuation routes out of DC and where I go. A wonderful futurist named Mia Birdsong told me she's considering becoming an EMT. And I'm like, if I can get in good enough shape, maybe I should become an EMT, just for the knowledge. My sister's a doctor. If I'm an EMT, we could save lives. You know, she's already saved lives. She like did a tracheotomy at a banquet, saved a woman's life. So I think about things like that. How useful am I? How useful am I to myself? How useful am I to others? And joy. You know, like the arts, fashion. Like, I'm not a fashion person, but if you're a fashion person, go for it. We should do things that bring joy, and that's sort of like the Pop Culture Collaborative, because they're like, they did Joy to the Polls, I think, in 2000 where they had DJs come to the polls. And, you know, why not? Of course, now there are laws that you can't even hand out bottles of water, which is ridiculous. But, I mean, tell me, like, what area you're thinking about the most in terms of improving things.
Well, I thought that when you were describing a cold civil war, you were describing essentially polarization. And you characterized it, I thought, really effectively as pluralists and anti-pluralists. And that's super helpful, because I think we have to change the language. But, so I guess my question is, how do we start talking to one another? Because that's essentially what a Cold War and
Cold Civil
and a
War,
lot
yeah.
of baggage with it. But it's essentially, you know, opposing forces not engaged in outright violence, but also not engaging with each other in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so what Nick Fuentes says is part of the Cold Civil War, demonizing entire groups of people. I think that, you know, the removal of certain people from the workplaces, of federal government and corporations, not just Black people, but all the lawyers who've left the Department of Justice because they can't do their jobs, that's Cold Civil War. Like, you know, if you have the executive pen, you can Cold Civil War to your heart's content. So the Cold Civil War is actually causing direct harms to people. Like, I have a 2-unit house in DC, and my tenant got ripped from the State Department. And listen to this is rich. She's a white woman, and she had worked all over the world. And she was telling me she got ripped. I was like, oh, you know, are they shutting the department down? She's like, no, they're hiring only Afrikaners.
No.
I'm like, for reals? And she's like, for reals. So that's Cold Civil War. So a lot of the stuff that has to do with the government's ability to give us or deny us opportunity, and corporations being quislings on that. But like I said, I think that having strategies for being comfortable in your own home and your own body are the most powerful things, because they don't put you in a state of perpetual fear. Like that letter I wrote to the billionaires, I was in fear for 5 years, because I was like, oh my God, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. And then once the democropocalypse began, I was much calmer, because I was like, now we can finally have a conversation. All those things I've been telling you that you said I was crazy, we can actually talk about. So we should definitely talk with each other, and I think we should just really take care of ourselves and each other. Like, there's nothing wrong with baking cookies on a snowy day. That could be a vital part of keeping your energy up. But yeah, read, obviously read, study, etc. But I think self-care and openness to others. Yeah. Okay, you first.
Thank you. This was a really interesting talk, and I have several questions I could ask, but I think what I'm interested in hearing that you haven't touched on yet. I mean, you talked about law enforcement and how we should be like strengthening that system and understanding what already exists within it. But I'm curious on your thoughts about like anti-carcerality, about if you have any on prison abolition and like moving towards this better co-created world.
I couldn't agree more. Like the American prison system, people have talked about it as, a vital part of the end of Reconstruction, Jim Crow to today, but it's also a financial engine. People make so much money running these private prisons. And not only that, there are places which have lost all industry where they feel like their only option is to take a private prison. So I'm not only blaming on, the people who, I really think that the people who run both private and public prisons need to be held to account. Like, I live in New York, and one of my friends did a story many years ago on a teen who was taken to Rikers, put in solitary, and by the time he got out, he just committed suicide. He was like, I'm done here. So the question is, how do we do it? And I think the answer to everything is we do it together. Like, we begin to stand up for each other. That's how we do it. Thanks. Oh, he left, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much I came in late, I'm so sorry, and really wish I could have been here for the whole talk. So I'm hesitant to even ask a question in case I'm mischaracterizing what I heard. So I guess for me, as someone who thinks a lot about existential threats, and also, if I think about it too hard, live in a lot of fear, one of my concerns, right, is that as we're kind of tinkering around the edges, right, of how to build this world together, and we have to build it together, right, the political and economic elites of the world are conspiring to foreclose our future, right? And this, to me, right, is a question, and I'm not entirely sure, because I came in late, right, I am very kind of concerned in general about like the notion, right, that capitalism can be reformed. Right, if we look at the root of all these existential threats, right, the root is whether it's military, industrial complex, nuclear war, AI, right, climate change, right, even in the COP summit, right, like I was horrified to find out that the biggest delegation from Brazil, the second biggest delegation in numbers was the fossil fuel industry. And so, I guess, right, like all of this is a question of like whether we need to, or whether we're able, right, to reform capitalism, whether we can ultimately appeal to like the civic duty, right, and the like magnanimous impulses of our ruling class, or whether fundamentally we need to be able to come together to like overthrow capitalism. And so the work together is to develop, right, a class consciousness, right, and a vision, right, for a more democratic country and worlds. And I'm even hesitant to suggest like that can exist within the borders of a nation state, right? Whether we need a full revolution of human values to meet these unprecedented challenges. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not 100% sure where you started with this, but whether or not, right, this question of whether capitalism, right, can ultimately be like moderated or regulated in a way that works for everyone, or whether we do need some sort of revolution. And just one last point, if we do need that revolution, right, like the way that the government is now increasingly like using right, surveillance and like the tools of empire, right, that is like boomerang back home, whether or not like we're even able to effectuate change anymore, or whether ultimately, right, we're kind of foreclosed from these possibilities. And so yeah, that's so many thoughts. I'm so sorry. I'm like I'm having a breakdown as we speak.
Well, I totally got you. I think capitalism as we know it cannot survive.
Okay.
But the question is, what will come out of it? And I personally think one way I want to, kind of interact with capitalism is to do what my mother did when she was a single mother with a master's degree but couldn't get arrested in her field and didn't have any money. We grow food. We do, like the more that you do, my sister has started canning again. So I'm a big fan of mutual aid and self-sufficiency, but I think the billionaires know that the clock is up. Like, I know a billionaire and she got salty when I mentioned something about the billionaires, but if the billionaires don't do more for society, people will take them down. But I don't think that even the billionaires are the issue, meaning you always have inequality if the whole system is unequal. And our economy was built on slavery. So, like exploitation for money is just in our DNA. And in fact, most of the major banks in America were the banks that held the assets of slavery. Like you can look it up, like which American banks participated in blah, blah, blah. It's shocking. Well, it's not shocking. It's just gross. So we have to, I think that reform is not ideal, but I myself don't know, like when everybody's going to Temu and buying fast fashion and whatever, like, are we ready? I don't know. I do think that the AI job populace is gonna, there are estimates that up to 10 million people, maybe even 20 million people could get displaced. That will change the economy fundamentally. I think if the job losses are that high, There may be something like universal basic income, but then I worry that universal basic income becomes a ghetto for like the billionaires and UBI. I don't have answers, but this system is not gonna stand. I just don't know what's coming next.
Farai, you said near the beginning that the media or journalism would be in the top 10 institutions responsible for crises. What are some of the ways in which the media effectively censors dissenting points of view, like some of the organizations that you mentioned that don't show up on CNN?
Right.
Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even mention all this, but when I started my career, well, like 5 years after I started my career, I became a pundit on CNN with Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, who's now Kellyanne Conway. And then later on the Bush v. Gore election night, I was on air with Tucker Carlson. And even though there was a lot of, there were edges of fluff, much more of it was substantive. So I think the first way people are censored is that if you have strong, smart opinions, that's not what they want. Like, a lot of the shows want the emotion. Oh, it's terrible, that bill, ugh. But like, what's the analysis? And there's still people who have the analysis, but there's a lot of, you had Gabby Delval as a speaker at a virtual event, and she's the kind of person I think is the future of journalism. Independent journalist. Well, she's now working for, who is it, Verge?
You've got that Verge.
Yeah. So, but she, she's someone who I suspect will have a career where she always bounces between institutions and independence. Institutions and independence. That's what I did. And even though it was not necessarily a financial winner for me, that strategy, I'm really proud of the work I did. My best work was done either as an independent or as a freelancer, because I ended up getting the opportunity to work in some very powerful institutions, but I was just like, really? They're like, yeah. So I think that the future of the press, I would love to see, and there may already be something like this, but I don't know about it. I would love to see a major attempt at forming a, remote collective where everyone owned their own IP. That's a big problem too. Like if you're a reporter or writer and you are not independent, like the Microsoft contract for writing was that we own your stuff throughout the known universe. It's like, okay, I can't even go to Mars and get a check? I guess not. So yeah, I think that there's really big IP problems. There's of course the financial problems that reporters face, but I think it would be great to form collectives outside of newsrooms. I also have an indecent proposal that I really want to pitch to Barry Weiss because she's annoying. Pull a Ted Conover. And what I mean by that is this Professor Ted Conover did a book called New Jack, where he got a job as a prison guard and then wrote about it. Like, New Jack, the military. Like, send young men in to enlist for a 2-year term. Have them serve that whole term, win your Pulitzer. Like, media is lazy. There's too much blah, blah, and not enough investigation. And also, not enough of a moral center. There's still demonization of the poor, demonization of whatever that pops up in key media outlets. So I think that to have some kind of an umbrella system where people could get healthcare and distribution, not just healthcare and financial support, but the real problem is distribution. All of the distribution pipelines, except YouTube, are breaking down. Basically, so many people are cord cutting. The net, like MS Now means like MS, where's the money gonna come from? Like a lot of places are just unstable. And I think there are ways to solve that problem, but it'll take money. But there's so many good reporters. They just need better outlets. Tell me more about what you think might work.
Well, I mean, it does go back to the question of corporate control of the media, and, you know, they want access to power.
Yeah.
And they want to challenge it, so they're not, you know, they fire people who challenge it. And they have been more than ever in my life, I think, recently. They're extorting.
Yeah.
You know, Trump is flat out extorting media companies
Yep.
and getting away with it, so. It's very bleak.
I mean, part of that is because media is so consolidated. So in one of my many previous lives, I was put on a lifetime advisory board by Bob Iger when I worked at ABC. And I'm really saddened and disgusted to see how Iger has quizzlinged. You know, in fact, we were supposed to have like possibly a family reunion at Disney. I'm like, no. But if Disney didn't own ABC, ABC might have more cojones. It's just that everything is owned by someone else. And the smaller, not the smaller in size an organization is, but the fewer rungs of corporate supervision, the better chance you have of doing good journalism.
Other thoughts,
Yeah,
questions,
we got one
comments?
from Brennan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was interested to hear a little bit more. In the very beginning, you were talking about your spidey senses in the conversations that you had with people all over the country that
Yeah.
sort of made you think that you had that prediction coming. And I think about it in the light of also what you mentioned about like the kind of reality zones that we live in, and sometimes I feel like in this area there's a little bit of a bubble effect of the zone that we live in, and I'm just kind of curious to like hear a little bit more about what some of the insights that you were gleaning that made those spidey senses come up, like in different areas of the country, or even like specific people that you were talking about. Like, what were you hearing that made you think that this was going to be the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, some of it came from my travels and reporting, but some of it also came from, I would say, a year or 15-month DM correspondence I had on Twitter with the white nationalists. So as the 2016 election was coming up, I started following white supremacists, white nationalists. So I would find someone and I'd follow all the people they were following, so I could see in real time how people reacted to things. And I followed this one guy. He said, "You might not want to follow me, I'm a white nationalist." I said, "That's why I followed you." And we talked for a long time. He went to Charlottesville. He had mental health issues. I had mental health issues, but he was a different person when he came back from Charlottesville. He was radicalized and he was kind of incoherent. And we talked about loneliness, mental health. He said, "I kind of think of you as a friend," and it was hard to say this. I said, "I don't think of you as a friend, but I think of you as a trusted fellow traveler. Like, I trust you in these conversations." And eventually I lost track of him because he kept getting deplatformed, and then he would start something else, and I'd find him, but eventually I lost him. I actually archived, the Internet Archive, which is a great organization in San Francisco, archived the conversation, so I have it. But he was like, "This is about white people being able to control America after we're a minority." And I was like, it's refreshing to hear the quiet part out loud, and we have to remember that. And by white people, I mean, in this case, people who can lead, not just the white nationalists, but people who lean in the white nationalist direction. And that's why I said in the call of whiteness, like, white people have to get engaged. Like, the civil rights movement is over. I was talking to Van Jones, and he was like, "We had a theory of change, like, just be excellent, just be good citizens, and then you'll be kind of mainstream." He's like, "That theory of change is over." And I do think, like, you're gonna find certain groups of people going back to forming a black town or whatever, for protection or for solace. And it's gonna be up to white Americans to decide what the definition of whiteness is. Like, is whiteness, a racial attribute to the extent that race is even a thing because it's not biological, blah, blah, or is it gonna be a political movement that will maintain minority power and majority people of color country? And it's really up to white people to choose how you navigate that, you know? So there was, the DMs were important, going to, interviewing the evangelicals. So the evangelical couple I interviewed in South Carolina had actually been part of the march to take down the Confederate flag as part of the South Carolina flag. But then during the election, first they were like, we would never vote for Trump, but their church went for Trump, and then they both voted for Trump. I was like, it's a wrap. You know? Like, Christian nationalism is no joke. It's like I said, Christian nationalism is not a religion, it's an ideology. And the pastor to both, you know, Captain Haircut and to the Speaker of the House is a man who says he's not sure women should be able to vote. Like, WTF, but that's super conservative Christian nationalism is completely disempowering of women. There are places that are in between, but yeah, I mean, I hope that some people in the evangelical community bring it on. There's a great research organization, PRRI, which stands for Public Religion whatever Institute, run by a guy named Robert P. Jones, and he grew up as a white evangelical in a really racist church, and then built a career out of studying them and producing research reports. And he's like, yeah, we're captured, like my original demographic is captured. And so voter capture is a term that people use, like, if a group has nowhere to go, and they can only really vote for one candidate. So black people are considered captured by the Democratic Party, which is accurate, but may change. Evangelicals are captured by the Republican Party. I think that eventually there will be some kind of equivalent of a general strike among, let's say, black women, if, because the Democrats now will be tempted to tack to the right in ways that may not benefit black women. And so what if there was a Shirley Chisholm party? You could run a pool as the candidate, but whatever, you have the party, and it was really meant to be a protest, and if you wanted to vote for the Democrats, you could, but you could also vote for the Shirley Chisholm party, and you see how many people voted for the Shirley Chisholm party. It might get that street fighting. Like, I think that people are like, oh, but black people have the most to lose. No, we don't. We actually don't. We're already, like, underpaid, you know, often living in neighborhoods where we've been corralled, and we know how to survive that. And one thing I say at the end of the call to whiteness is, like, it may be harder for us than for you, but we are more prepared. And I think white Americans could learn a lot from the perseverance of black Americans and how we survived in, you know, less than optimal conditions. So there's all sorts of things like that. So definitely talking to the evangelicals, talking to the, you know, Rust Belt Republicans. They had a friggin' badass situation. They were like on fire. Trumbull County, Ohio. And they were very generous with their time. But I think about, you know, and being from Baltimore, I understand what it's like to see your hometown in distress. And so when I showed up, I was like, okay, I get it. You know, there's all these beautiful buildings that are rotting because no one has any money. I got their distress. The thing is, voting for this administration is not going to fix their problems. I think one thing we're going to notice, people are going to say, hey, you said the price of eggs was going to go down or whatever. Some people will begin to be dissatisfied, but I learned from everyone I talked to. Thanks. Oh, maybe that's good.
I have another one.
Okay, yes.
So I'm just, I'm super curious as someone that's been on the inside, like, of media and journalism, what ideological, like, interference actually is happening and what that would look like? And I'm asking in part, or I was reminded of it because you said Van Jones?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, recently, right, and maybe he's just, this is, he's not following the party line, or he's gonna say whatever he wants to say, But right, there's been some like really kind of egregious, from my perspective, things he said about like a joke about this being an Iranian psyop about Gaza, right? He made a joke, Gaza, dead baby, dead baby.
Yeah.
And then,
This is not an endorsement of Van.
no, yeah, but I'm just I'm curious, right? And even like after Mamdani, he said like, oh, he's very angry now, and like this is not the Mamdani we've seen. And so I guess like if, and not saying that he isn't saying these because he's choosing to, but like if there was pressure on these, like to use a derogatory term, talking heads, I don't know, like these journalists right on like TV, what would that look like? Is that happening? Are people telling them what they can and can't say? And
They're voting with their dollars. They're only employing people who do what they want them to. Like, I've known Van for nearly 30 years. We used to hang out in Oakland. I don't really love the person he's become. I still stay in touch with him. But Jeff Bezos gave him $100 million. And you don't give that to someone who's a transformer. Mackenzie makes transformational gifts. Bezos does him. So yeah, I think that Van's, remember that Van was BFFs with Jared Kushner. Like, there was that whole Kushneritis, So, yeah, so that was not an endorsement of Van, but I think he's right about that. The sort of civil rights framework is done. What I used to think is like, I was trained to be excellent because that was my family's strategy. Like, be excellent. If you are excellent, everything will fall in place. I see no evidence of that. I really don't. I mean, I have a good life, but excellence is not getting me where I need to go. So people look for people that make them comfortable. And also the whole, Israel-Gaza thing was a sorting hat. Karen Atiyah, who used to guest host the show that I did, was fired from the Washington Post in a particularly nasty way. So, yeah, I mean.
And in picking up on that, not just jobs, but the New York Times had a list of terms that you could not use. I can't remember examples of that.
And BBC too.
And BBC, yeah. I mean, you certainly couldn't use the G word. You still can't, but I mean, there were a whole subordinate set of things you couldn't use to describe Israeli violence.
Yeah, I mean, it's sickening. It's really sickening. And I don't know, I don't think that there's much hope that big corporate media will improve. I think they're just gonna ride till they die and just do whatever they do. And it's the independent journalists that need strengthening. And also props to my college classmate, Betsy Reed, who runs The Guardian. And The Guardian is great, nonprofit newsroom, there's still hope.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We've got some cookies and water, and so I'm sure people can informally, chat afterwards. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed